We're going to come to hear from God's word now. Our reading today is from Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Ecclesiastes chapter 8. We'll be starting from verse 2. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place, and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet, because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labour that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live, and afterward they join the dead. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. Go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labour under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
How do you respond to your limitations? I'm sure there are times where you just feel at the limit of what you can do. You feel constrained by the things that you can't control. And you say, what can I do? I'm stuck. It might be physical, the pain, the inability to do something that normally you could do, or the inability to do something you need to do, want to do. It might be relational with someone you're working with or living with, and you ask, what more can I do? It might be a reflection on time. I can see time running out and I'm just nowhere near where I need to be. How do you respond in that moment? So here's the question. How do you respond to your limitations? And Ecclesiastes' way of asking that question is, how do I be wise with the limitations that I find? That's the issue that our wise king continues to wrestle with in Ecclesiastes 8 and 9. Today we very much pick up where we left off last week from chapter 7. It is good to be wise. Being wise is living according to the shape of the world that God created, and it's good. Wisdom is a shelter. Being wise protects us. The foolish are pictured in Ecclesiastes as walking around in darkness, but the wise walk around with their eyes wide open. Though, of course, we're reminded that wisdom is required amidst the limitations of life. We're going to spend a bit more time there today. And so we come to this passage that Judith just read for us, and immediately we recognise another limitation. It is the limitation of working under authority. Here, it's the authority of the king. So we are wise when we work under the constraints or within the constraints of authority. I'm going to deal with that first. And then second, I'm going to return to some of the other limitations that we've seen in Ecclesiastes. And then thirdly, we're going to reflect on the conclusion of the wise king. How do you live wisely when you're surrounded by such limitations? So the first point is this: wisely work within the constraints of authority. Pick it up with me at chapter 8, verse 2. Chapter 8 of Ecclesiastes, verse 2 to 4. Obey the king's commands, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Here we are all limited by constraints of authority, whether it be bosses or fathers or governments or whatever. We're all limited to some degree by the authority that is over us. Now, none of us are really familiar with working within the restraints of a king in Australia. I mean, we have a queen, but none of us have lived in a time when the monarch has wielded significant amounts of power, authority. That power resides in the hands of the voters and the people the voters elect. Yet in a monarchy, there's much wisdom in living this way. Verse 2, obeying the monarch is a good start because the monarch has been appointed by God, witnessed. God has witnessed, God has sanctioned it. Later in verse 5, obeying the monarch brings less chance of harm. Verse 3, like Proverbs 25, verse 6 that we've read recently in chapter a day, it says this: do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence, and be careful what matter you bring before the king. Verse 3 is, don't ask the monarch, what are you doing? There's great wisdom here about respecting authority, about picking both your battles and your timing. Verse 5, the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. Living under a monarch involves watching for God-given opportunities and working within the confines of proper procedure. Now, we see this in the Bible, don't we? We see the astute Esther do this in Esther 7. You see Saul's son, Jonathan, doing this with care with his father, Saul, who was a pretty erratic individual. You see the prophet Nathan being careful with King David. And so we see it demonstrated in the Bible. And there's great wisdom here in working with a king. Does that mean that since we're not under a king like this, there's nothing to be gained from this passage? Well, of course not. All of us fall under various forms of authority. All of us fall under authority that God has appointed over us. Now, of course, this call to obedience does not mean that does not exclude going against authority at any time, but it's a call to wise opportunism and working within authority. There's a great wisdom in working out how to work with various shapes of authority that you fall under. Being wise will mean that you will approach authorities with your eyes open rather than foolishly wandering around in the dark. There's great wisdom here, both about respecting authority and picking your battles, picking your timing, watching for proper time and procedure. And so firstly, we are to be wise within the limitations of authority, within the constraints of authority. Now, that's the first thing to say. The second is we're going to return to the limitations that we've noticed over the last few chapters, and we notice here again in our passage, chapters 8 and 9. One of the most repeated themes in the book of Ecclesiastes is the limitation of life itself. Life is breath short. And one of the most limiting factors of life is that we don't know how long we've got. Chapter 8, verse 7, since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has the power over when to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. You see the limitation of life come up again and again at the beginning of chapter 9, that we all face the same destiny. Yet I think the verse that stands out most on this is chapter 9, verse 4. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better than a dead lion. There's life and there's death. Remember last week, being at a funeral is better than being at a wedding. Because at a funeral you're reminded of what no one talks about and what everyone avoids thinking about, our own mortality. And so that is a limitation, the limitation of our life before death. Now, another limit that we've seen before and we see again here is the limitation of wickedness. Wickedness remains part of the human journey that we're trying to navigate wisely. Chapter 8, verse 14, there is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. Remember, meaninglessness is this catch cry of Ecclesiastes. Excuse me. Looking at the world and recognizing it as meaningless or transient. As we've travelled through this book, the wise teacher king has frequently isolated this oppression at the hands of the wicked. If you flip back with me, you see it over and over again. Have a look at chapter 5, verse 8. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. Even further back in chapter 4, verse 1, again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. You see that right through this book. It's never far away from the view of this wise teacher king. And we see it again in chapter 8, verse 9. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to do his own hurt, or the NIV footnote says to their hurt. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. Here sees the oppressor in authority. This oppressor sees no justice in this life for his oppression. In fact, he's buried in pride of place in the centre of town where he practiced his oppression. The wicked who die happy. This, says the writer of Ecclesiastes, it's meaningless, it's vaporous, it's transient. There's real power in these observations, isn't there? Because we've all seen this, haven't we, in our own lives? The wicked getting away with it. We've seen it on a national and a state level premiers that were corrupt, having a state burial, a state funeral. But of course, there's countries outside of our experience that lived through far, far worse. And it's ironic that these observations are from someone in power, the wise teacher king. It's ironic that he observes these. He sees it, but it's too widespread for him to do anything about it. It just seems that oppression is everywhere he looks. It's stitched into the way of doing things this side of heaven. The reality of the wicked prospering is a despairing reality to live with. This is a limitation on our lives that somehow we've got to wisely navigate. That's another limitation, wickedness. Another limitation that we've seen before is the limitedness of our own wisdom. 8:16, pick it up with me there. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labour that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God had done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise, they claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. Yet another of our limitations is the limitation of our own wisdom. Sometimes we are at the limits of our wisdom to work out why things go on, and often we don't know. It's another limitation that we have to be wise with. These limitations that are on us, these limitations that are around us, these limitations that we find, they just pile up, don't they? I wonder if you've ever seen a child sitting in front of a front-loader washing machine. It's the best entertainment for toddlers. They love it. They get excited because they see their favourite bluey shirt going around and around. Oh, there it is, it's gone. Oh, there it is, it's gone. Or their favourite soft toy that mum has insisted that they wash. They see it going around and they see it, and it's an exciting thing. Now, as we read Ecclesiastes, it's a bit like that in seeing these limitations that come up. For us, it's less joyful because these limitations are quite dark. We see these in Ecclesiastes popping up over and over again. Rather than the toddler's joy, we get this adult desperation about seeing them and seeing the truth of them. I'm sure you've got to this point as you've read Ecclesiastes where you see another depressing thought, another limitation, and feel the weight of it and just ask, there are so many limitations in life. What is the point of doing anything? What is the point of trying anything? What is the point of seeking progress at all? But because we want to be wise, we've seen so far that our wisdom needs somehow to last through limited authority, through this limited breath-short life. Our wisdom needs to be throughout wickedness. Our wisdom needs to help us navigate even through our own limited wisdom. So how can we possibly be wise when we face all of these limitations? That's the point that the wise teacher comes to next. So, having seen these limitations, we now move thirdly to the writer's conclusion. Here it is. Despite all these limitations, we are to seek joy in God's gifts in this breath-short existence. Have a look at chapter 8, verse 15, and then we'll go to chapter 9, verse 7. Chapter 8, verse 15. So I commend the enjoyment of life because there is nothing better for a person under the sun to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of their life. All the days of the life God has given them under the sun. Again, chapter 9, verse 7, go, eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white. Always anoint your head with oil. Verse 9 of chapter 9, enjoy life with your wife whom you love all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labour under the sun. Whatever your hand finds, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead where you're going, there is neither working nor planning nor wisdom nor knowledge. And we've seen this kind of conclusion before in the book of Ecclesiastes. It seems again like we move very quickly from getting exhausted by all that is wrong and limiting this side of heaven, and then suddenly we're struck by this course of action, which is to eat and drink, to live the good life. It seems like a very odd transition to go through, doesn't it? From all these limitations suddenly to enjoying eating and drinking and living a good life. As New Testament Christians, it feels a bit like the Old Testament teacher king is advising us to do what Jesus later condemns. You remember Jesus' condemnation of the man in the parable who built bigger barns. The man who built bigger barns who said to himself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. It sounds like this passage, doesn't it? Now, you might remember that parable Jesus told in response to a man who wanted more money. And Jesus said this to him. He said to the man in the parable, verse 20 of Luke 12, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Verse 21, this is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. Jesus goes on to teach against worrying about what we do not have. How is what Jesus says here different to the wise teacher king in Ecclesiastes? Notice that at each point the teacher comes to this conclusion. This food and drink is the gift of God. The bigger barns man said, I have no place to store my crops. It was all about the abundance of his possessions. Where here in Ecclesiastes, the focus is recognizing, even within the constraints of life, authority, wickedness, time, knowledge, even within those constraints, the things that we have are gifts from God. Whereas the man building bigger barns was a self-made man. That was his stuff. But the same food and drink we enjoy, we recognize are from God. They are God's gift to us. And so the difference is that wise people will have a Godward posture towards God in what they have. In anything we have, it will be recognized as coming from God's hand. Our contentment comes from a reflection on God's generosity towards us. And so the wise teacher king is not saying, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die. It is more God-facing than that. It doesn't exclude our limitations, but the strong encouragement here is to recognize the good things you have are from God. Now, I'm certain this is an area of our life that can see improvement. Gratitude or thankfulness is a spiritual discipline. That is, it takes hard work. It's one of those areas that require attention and reminders because we don't naturally do this, do we? We don't naturally turn to God and say thanks. It's something we have to work hard at. So as Christians, as those who are in Christ, are the Old Testament teacher king's conclusions your conclusions? That is, since we live after Jesus' completed work, do the wise teacher king conclusions still stand? Or are our conclusions, ought our conclusions be different from the Old Testament teacher kings? Well, of course, some things are the same, aren't they? Even after Jesus, we still see the same sort of wickedness that he saw. Even after Jesus, we have to work through the authority structures just as he had to. Even after Jesus, we have the opportunity to enjoy God's gifts in the same way that he did. We travel through the same journey of life. However, our conclusions about life after death seem very different to his. We have in Jesus a far stronger hope of life through judgment. We have a far stronger hope. If you compare your Christian hope to chapter 9, have a look, just compare the hope you have to chapter 9, verse 5. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. See, as a Christian, we wouldn't say that. We know that God knows our name because our name is written in the book of life in Jesus. We know that after death there is real life to come. We know that there is significance to come after death. And so our conclusion isn't necessarily exactly the same as his. If you think about the end of each of the Gospels of Jesus, at the end of Matthew, you see this radical picture of making Christ known, this mission that the disciples and all of us are sent on. You see something similar in the book of John. You see in the book of Luke that turns into the book of Acts. You see this mission that the disciples and God's people were on to carry the news of this man who was dead but now is alive, risen from the dead. This mission to carry it from Judea to Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Do we see the disciples and the early Christians drinking together, eating together? Yes, of course. Do we see them thanking God together? Yes, of course. But we also see that urgency of making Christ known. Why? Well, this is the hope of life after death. This is the hope of fixing relationship with God. This is a hope of not being under God's judgment anymore, but going through God's judgment in Jesus to the hope of glory. And that compels us, as we're about to sing, your glorious cause, O God, engages our hearts. Make Jesus Christ be known. This is our conclusion in Jesus. And so, yes, every gift does come from God's hand. But above all, we thank God for our Saviour, Jesus Christ, for his death and resurrection, and for the hope of sharing in his glory. So, friends, being wise involves recognising the limitations that you find, recognising the limitations of authority, the limitations of your life, your time, the limitations of wickedness around us, the limitations of your wisdom itself. But wisdom also involves turning to God in thanks for all that has been given, for most of all, for what has been given by God to us in his Son, Jesus Christ. Just as I close, I want to leave you with this story from the battlefield. This letter Charles Ward wrote to his mother from the battlefield. The letter goes like this: Dear Mother, I hope I may come home again, but life here is uncertain. Do not fear for your tired soldier boy. Death has no fears for me. My hope is still firm in Jesus. Meet us and Father in heaven, for now I bid you a happy farewell. Your affectionate son, Charles Ward. Now, I don't know how this story ends, but what I love about that letter is he picks up two things that we pick up in Ecclesiastes. He picks up just the sheer uncertainty of life. For him, it's on the battlefield. For him, the uncertainty that we see all around us. But of course, his conclusion is the same as ours in Jesus Christ. His solid hope on life after death through Jesus as the greatest thing for which we can give thanks to God.